Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What created the Potomsky Crater? Who was involved in the 1963 Great Train Robbery? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about vitrified forts. The first vitrified forts were discovered in the 18th century during a survey of the Scottish Highlands. The surveyors discovered ancient forts with walls made of stones that had been melted together. But why and how was this possible? Since the 18th century, approximately 200 vitrified forts have been found throughout Europe. 70 of those forts are in Scotland. Before finding the forts throughout Europe, it had been believed that they only existed in Scotland. However, vitrified forts have also been found throughout Western and Northern Europe. There are at least 50 vitrified forts in Scotland. There are several in Brittany and northern France. In Turkey, the ruins of the city Hattusis are partially vitrified. Hattusis was the capital of the Hittite Empire in the Late Bronze Age. In Iran, some of the ancient ziggurats have vitrified materials within. There are 2 forts each in England and Ireland that have been vitrified. Some vitrified forts also exist in Germany and Hungary. The earliest vitrified forts were built during the Neolithic period during the 5th and 6th millennium BCE. However, many were built during the Bronze Age, which occurred between 1100 and 1300 BCE. During this time, people lived in small, separate communities. Several of the vitrified forts in Europe appear to be residences of the elite. Is it possible they were constructed to protect these elites' wealth? The Scottish fort Dún Dairdal is on a hilltop in Glen Nevis. This fort was probably built in the 1st millennium BC. It may have been used and reused throughout history. There is a legend called Deirdre of the Sorrows that may help explain how the fort came to be vitrified. The legend explains that before Deirdre was born, a chief foretold her great beauty. It was foretold that Deirdre's beauty would lead to people fighting and dying for her love. Because of this prophecy, the king decided to raise Deirdre in isolation to protect people from her beauty. As she grew, Deirdre became as beautiful as the prophecy had foretold. She met and fell in love with a man named Naoise. Naoise was a handsome warrior, hunter, and singer. Upon finding out about their love, the king was furious. He had wanted to marry Deirdre. The king sent a spy to watch Deirdre. The spy told the king she was no longer beautiful, but the king sent another spy who explained that this was not true. The king sent an army to kill Naoise, who fought back valiantly but lost. Then the king took Deirdre as his wife. Deirdre, not wanting to be married to the king, killed herself as a result. It is believed by some that during the battles to kill Naoise, the fort was burned. Could this explain the vitrification of this particular fort? There was a Welsh poem written about King Arthur. The poem was written by Taliesin and is called The Spoils in Annwn. At one point, the poem says, "Beyond the glass fortress they did not see the valor of Arthur." Could the glass fortress in the poem be talking about a vitrified fort? Originally, the forts were believed to have been vitrified through destruction. It was believed the vitrification occurred because of past battles. However, after further study, it was noted that these forts don't have any mortar between the stones. The only thing holding the fort walls together is the glass from the vitrified stones. Today, it's believed that some of the forts were purposely vitrified. Others were created through destruction, and still others have been vitrified by incidental reasons. For example, Caer Uni in Wales only has vitrification at the entrance of the fort. This suggests that vitrification may have been the result of an enemy attack. Forts like Broborg in Sweden are vitrified throughout. This suggests that vitrification was done purposely. Kollerberg is also in Sweden, however, has vitrification in scattered areas throughout the fort. It's possible this vitrification was caused by lightning strikes. There are two different schools of thought regarding how the forts were vitrified. Some scientists believe that the vitrification is the accidental result of something else like metal forging, whereas others believe that vitrification was part of a purposeful construction. In the 1930s, geologist Wallace Thornycroft and archaeologist Vere Gordon Child conducted an experiment. They stacked stones and timbers into a wall that was about 6 feet by 6 feet, or just over 1.8 meters by 1.8 meters. They then set the wall on fire. The wall burned for 3 hours before collapsing, with the fire estimated to be about 2,192 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,200 degrees Celsius. Among the debris, they found pieces that had been vitrified, as well as timbers that had been embedded in glass. Fabian Wadsworth, a volcanologist at Maximilian University in Munich, said of the study, "That experiment really solidified the point of view that weakening a fort was the motive for vitrification. I would argue that the people who did that experiment in the 1930s were not as good engineers as the Iron Age people were." A 1978 study done by Youngblood and his co-workers was published in the Journal of Archaeological Science. This study determined that a simple burning of ordinary timber-laced walls couldn't account for the strong vitrification found in the forts. The fires would have had to have burned for days with sustained high temperatures over 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,000 degrees Celsius to cause the vitrification seen. This was only possible when the fires had been contained and when the stones and timbers had soil, clay, and combustible materials like peat added in. The fort walls do have holes, which may have been to either put charcoal in or for airflow. Some scientists believe the vitrification was used purposely to strengthen walls of the forts. At first, scientists didn't agree with this theory because heat weakens stone, but the stones used in these forts is not weakened by the heat. The particular sandstone used in these forts is actually strengthened by the vitrification process. If the construction theory is correct, the walls would have been built in ditches with the timber palisades added. These stone and earth-filled wooden frames or cobblestone structures were built into walls and towers. They were also added to existing homes or villages. It's believed the construction of these forts was undertaken in response to an increased violence. The sandstone used in the forts was carried from faraway locations, which suggests that it was used purposely. The walls were then heated to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,100 degrees Celsius. There are some theories as to how the vitrification occurred if it was part of a destructive process. Some believe the vitrification was the result of repeated use of huge signal fires. Others believe the vitrification was caused by Roman attackers using a literal scorched earth attack. Still others believe the vitrification was caused by damage from ancient incendiary weaponry like Greek fire. The final school of thought is that perhaps the vitrification was caused by an Iron Age atomic bomb. Fabian Wadsworth started his own investigation by getting samples of Darley Dale sandstone, which is similar to the sandstone used 2,500 years ago. When heating the solid stone, it became 47% more porous. This weakening was caused by microcracks, which happen when parts of a rock expand. However, when heating sandstone powder, the porosity decreased by 84 to 89%. Small particles came together to form a mass of dense glass. Wadsworth said, "When I've visited the forts, I've noticed that there is often a lot of fine-grained building material between much larger blocks." He doesn't know if this was done deliberately, but the experiment showed that small particles within the sandstone could have made for strong mortar. In 1980, another attempt was undertaken to recreate the vitrification process in the forts. The study was done by archaeologist Ian Ralston for a television show called Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. Ralston believed the vitrification was the result of fire damage caused by invaders. To prove his theory, Ralston built a model fort wall with a large pile of brushwood leaning up against it. He then lit the brushwood on fire. This study showed that only a small number of the stones melted. Ralston concluded that this was enough data to support his hypothesis. He theorized that ancient armies had experts in pyrotechnics similar to modern-day demolition squads. He believed that armies burned forts not just to destroy them, but to send a message. Ralston wrote that the experimental wall, edged by flame and glowing red at night, made an impressive sight even against the backdrop of a modern city. Widespread vitrification must have appeared awesome to the prehistoric communities, a spectacular advertisement of power. A 2021 experiment found that dark glasses formed from amphibolite or dolerite rocks melted at 1,832 to 2,192 degrees Fahrenheit, or 1,000 to 1,200 degrees Celsius. Clear glasses formed from the partial melting of feldspar. The theories tested in this study were the two most accepted theories: destructive burning by enemies and deliberate melting to strengthen materials, as well as less accepted theories like incidental melting from signal fires, lightning strikes, and deconstruction of sites like ritual burnings. Boborg Fort, or Bridge Fort, in Sweden is about 20 kilometers southeast of Uppsala, Sweden. This fort has been vitrified since at least 1744. In this fort, both granitoid and amphibolite rocks are fused to create both clear and dark glass. Scientists then compared the lab-heated rocks to those found at the site. The comparison showed that the rocks had been heated for a long time and that some of the rocks also required a slow cooling period. The scientists were unable, however, to reproduce the cordierite crystalline phase in this study. If the melting of the rocks was done purposely, it's likely that Iron Age people could have done it. The technology existed at that time. The study showed that as long as the temperature is above about 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,000 degrees Celsius, the rocks will show some melting. If the temperature is above 2,192 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,200 degrees Celsius, the rocks will show extensive melting. The rocks in the study were only heated for 15 minutes, and it's likely that heating times in the field would have been longer. Interestingly, dating from inside Broberg shows that the fort was used after the initial vitrification process, so it was not destroyed through vitrification. What caused some forts throughout Europe to become vitrified? Was it part of a destructive or a constructive process? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ruddy Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.